The rhythm of the waves had been his heartbeat for 45 years. Captain Tom McKenzie, 68, sat in the back row of the Tonight Show studio, his weathered hands unconsciously tapping the ancient pattern he'd learned from the sea. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, the eternal pulse of Beacon Point Lighthouse that had guided ships safely home through nearly half a century of storms. Tomorrow, the Coast Guard would officially retire Tom and automate the lighthouse that had been his home, his mission, and his sacred trust since 1979. The towering white structure on the rocky coast of Maine, visible for 20 miles on a clear night, would continue to shine. But for the first time in 150 years, there would be no human heart beating in rhythm with its beacon. The small lighthouse pin on his navy wool sweater caught the studio lights as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Tom wasn't used to being away from his post for more than a few hours, and being in a television studio in New York City felt like visiting an alien world. The sounds were all wrong. No crash of waves, no cry of seagulls, no steady rotation of the great lens above his head that had marked time like the world's most important metronome. What Tom didn't know was that his story had reached far beyond the fishing boats and cargo ships he'd guided to safety. Over the past month, mariners from around the world had been sharing stories about the lighthouse keeper who had gone above and beyond the call of duty, who had saved not just ships, but lives, who had turned a lonely outpost into a beacon of hope for anyone lost at sea or in life. Tom had inherited the position from his father, Captain James McKenzie, who had kept the light for 32 years before him. The McKenzie family had been guardians of Beacon Point for nearly 8 decades, understanding that their responsibility went far beyond simply maintaining equipment. They were the last hope for vessels caught in storms, the guardian angels for fishermen who'd lost their way, the steady presence that meant home to sailors returning from months at sea. Over 4.5 decades, Tom had witnessed the ocean in every mood: calm summer evenings when the water looked like glass, in winter storms so fierce they'd shattered windows and torn away pieces of the lighthouse itself. He'd guided everything from small fishing boats to massive container ships, from pleasure craft to Coast Guard vessels, through fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand, and storms so violent they claimed other lighthouses along the coast. But Tom's real gift wasn't just technical expertise. It was his uncanny ability to sense when mariners were in trouble before they even knew it themselves. He developed an almost supernatural awareness of weather patterns, tidal changes, and the subtle signs that meant danger was approaching. More than once, he'd radioed warnings to ships that saved lives when his predictions proved tragically accurate. The Tonight Show tickets had been a retirement gift from the Maine Maritime Museum, where Tom's story had become legendary among those who understood the sea. "You've spent 45 years looking out for everyone else," the museum director had said. "Let someone look out for you for one evening." It was a Thursday night taping in September, and Jimmy was in good spirits after interviewing a popular actor about his new adventure film. During his commercial break interaction with the audience, his attention was drawn to Tom by his obvious discomfort with the indoor environment and the way he kept glancing toward windows as if checking weather conditions. "Sir, you look like someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. What do you do for work?" Tom straightened up with the automatic posture of someone accustomed to authority and responsibility. "I'm a lighthouse keeper, sir. Beacon Point Light in Maine." "Well, I was. I retire tomorrow after 45 years. A warm murmur went through the audience. Lighthouse keepers had an almost mythical quality in most people's minds. Romantic figures from an earlier era when human courage was all that stood between ships and disaster. 45 years as a lighthouse keeper? That's incredible. That must be one of the last manned lighthouses in the country. Tom's face showed a mixture of pride and sadness. "Yes, sir, one of the last. After tomorrow, it'll be automated like all the others. But for 45 years, there's been a McKenzie keeping the light burning, watching over the ships, making sure everyone gets home safe." "McKenzie, is this a family tradition?" "My father kept the light before me for 32 years. The McKenzie family has been at Beacon Point for 77 years total. My grandfather helped build the current structure in 1925. Jimmy was immediately intrigued. This wasn't just a job story. This was a family legacy, a connection to maritime history that was about to end forever. What's it been like spending your life watching over ships at sea? Tom's eyes lit up with the passion that had sustained him through decades of solitary nights. It's been an honor, sir. Every ship that passes is carrying someone's father, someone's son, someone's livelihood. Fishermen heading out to feed their families, cargo vessels bringing goods to market, pleasure boats carrying people on the adventure of their lives. My job was to make sure they all made it home. You must have some incredible stories from all those years. Oh, yes, sir. Thousands of ships, hundreds of rescues, more storms than I can count. But the best stories are the simple ones. Watching the fishing fleet head out at dawn, seeing a family on vacation wave from their sailboat, getting a radio call from a captain saying, "Thanks for the light, Beacon Point. See you next trip." The sincerity in Tom's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't someone who had simply done a job for 45 years. This was someone who had found deep meaning in protecting others. Jimmy made a decision that would transform the evening. Tom, I have a feeling there are some amazing stories behind those 45 years. Would you mind sharing some of them with us? Tom looked uncertain. Well, most of what happens out there is pretty quiet. Long stretches of routine broken up by moments of, well, excitement isn't the right word. Moments when everything matters. Those are exactly the moments we'd love to hear about. Come on down here. As Tom made his way to the stage with the careful balance of someone who'd spent decades on shifting decks, the applause began. Respectful recognition for a lifetime dedicated to maritime safety. When he reached the stage, Jimmy helped him up the steps and guided him to a comfortable chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy announced to the studio, "this is Captain Tom McKenzie. For 45 years, he's been the keeper of Beacon Point Lighthouse in Maine, guiding ships safely through some of the most dangerous waters on the East Coast. Tom, tell us about some of the rescues." Tom settled into the chair, and despite his earlier uncertainty, he was clearly in his element when talking about the sea and ships. "Well, the rescue I'll never forget happened in 1987. Hurricane Gloria was coming up the coast and most vessels had already made for safe harbor. But around midnight, I picked up a distress signal from a small fishing boat, the Mary Catherine, that had engine trouble about 8 miles out. Father and son, been fishing together for 20 years. Tom's voice grew more animated as he continued. The Coast Guard was overwhelmed with calls, wouldn't be able to get to them for hours. Seas were running 20 feet, winds over 60 knots. I could see their lights from the lighthouse, but they were drifting toward the rocks at Seal Point. What did you do? What any lighthouse keeper would do. I got on the radio and started talking them through it. Told them how to read the currents, which way to drift, how to use their sea anchor to control their position. For 6 hours I stayed on that radio, guiding them through the worst storm I'd ever seen. The audience was completely quiet, drawn into Tom's dramatic storytelling. Did they make it? Tom smiled for the first time since taking the stage. They made it. Just as the sun came up, I saw them round the point into Beacon Harbor, both of them waving up at the lighthouse. The son, Billy Morrison, he's a captain himself now, brings his own boy past the lighthouse every summer to wave at the light. Jimmy reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card. "Tom, I want you to have this, not because I want anything from you, but because 45 years of watching over people deserves recognition." But Jimmy had prepared more surprises. "Tom, we reached out to the Coast Guard and some maritime organizations before tonight. We wanted to hear about your service record." "My service record?" Jimmy pulled out an official-looking document. "According to the Coast Guard, in 45 years you've been directly involved in 127 rescues, saving 312 lives. Your weather predictions have prevented countless accidents, and your maintenance of the lighthouse has never failed. Not once in 45 years has Beacon Point Light gone dark when it was supposed to be on." Tom looked stunned. I never kept count. I just did what needed doing. There's more. We heard from Captain Sarah Williams of the merchant vessel Atlantic Pride. Captain McKenzie guided us through a fog bank in 1995 that was so thick we couldn't see our own bow. His radio directions and the lighthouse beam were the only things that kept us off the rocks. Our cargo that day was medical supplies for a hospital in Boston. Because of Tom McKenzie, we delivered medicine that saved lives we'll never know about. Jimmy continued reading testimonials. From the Maine Lobstermen's Association, Tom McKenzie has been the guardian angel of our fleet for decades. He knows every current, every reef, every weather pattern along our coast. There isn't a lobsterman in Maine who hasn't been helped by his guidance. The studio was completely silent, understanding they were learning about true heroism. Jimmy stood and addressed the audience directly. This man has spent 45 years standing watch over one of the most dangerous coastlines in America. He's been the last line of defense between mariners and disaster, the human heart in a technological system. He turned back to Tom. The maritime community wanted to do something special for your retirement. The Maine Maritime Museum is creating the Captain Thomas McKenzie Maritime Safety Foundation, funding for lighthouse preservation and maritime safety education. Tom's eyes filled with tears. A foundation to keep the lights burning? Yes, but there's more. The Coast Guard has decided to name their new training vessel the USCG Thomas McKenzie, the first time they've named a ship after an active lighthouse keeper. Jimmy had one final surprise. And Tom, because you've spent 45 years making sure ships find their way home, we wanted to help you find something too. From backstage, a young man in Coast Guard dress uniform appeared, carrying a beautifully crafted ship's bell. Captain McKenzie, the young officer said, I'm Ensign Billy Morrison. My father and grandfather were the fishermen you saved in Hurricane Gloria. This bell is from the new Mary Catherine, the boat my family bought with the insurance money from the old one. We wanted you to have it as a reminder that the lives you've saved have gone on to save others. Tom was openly crying now, overwhelmed by the recognition and the connection to a rescue he'd made nearly 40 years ago. Billy, little Billy Morrison, your grandfather would be so proud. Jimmy sat back down beside Tom. Tom, you said you just did what needed doing, but what you really did was show that in our automated world, there's still a need for human courage, human judgment, human heart. As they helped Tom back to his seat, he stopped and looked out at the audience one more time. Thank you, but I want everyone to know, the sea doesn't care about recognition or retirement. There will always be storms, always be people who need guidance home. The lights may be automated now, but the responsibility to watch over each other, that's something that can't be automated. That's something we all have to do. The episode that aired became one of the most watched Tonight Show segments of the year, sparking renewed interest in maritime history and lighthouse preservation. Tom's retirement ceremony the following week was attended by hundreds of mariners, Coast Guard officials, and grateful families whose lives had been touched by his service. The Captain Thomas McKenzie Maritime Safety Foundation raised over $500,000 in its first month. Tom spent his retirement volunteering at maritime museums and teaching navigation to young sailors, discovering that leaving the lighthouse didn't mean abandoning his calling. It meant sharing his knowledge with the next generation of those who go down to the sea. At 70, Tom still wakes up every night at 3 a.m. to check weather conditions, still volunteers at the Coast Guard station, and still carries a small lighthouse pin. A reminder that some lights never go out. They just find new ways to guide people safely home. Because sometimes the most important jobs are the loneliest ones, where one person stands watch so that others can sleep safely. And sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who spend their lives looking outward, watching over strangers they'll never meet, making sure that no matter how dark the night or fierce the storm, there's always a light to guide them home.